Hey guys, today I want to talk about EQ, how and when and where I use Corrective EQ and Tonal EQ. I think that mastering these two EQ techniques will help you have better mixes. Let's get right into it. One of the best techniques that you can learn to improve your mixing skills is how to properly use EQ. When I'm talking about EQ, I'm talking about two different ways, two different concepts of using EQ. One is corrective and one is tonal. That's what I want to showcase in today's video. So I have a vocal in my session. The track is called Quest from DQ. Little to none processing done on the vocal, no effects, just raw vocals.
Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down.
When I'm talking about corrective EQ, I'm talking about trying to clean up, trying to remove the nasty, the bad sounding parts of the frequency spectrum in the vocals. For this purpose, I'm gonna use Pro Q3. One corrective move that I do all the time is removing the low end. The low end is not that important when it comes to vocals, especially the really low end where you can find rumble if the artist is bouncing around in the studio and hitting the floor. That shock can be transmitted to the microphone. The microphone can pick that up. It's really important that you clean that low end. That way you can have cleaner vocals just with one EQ move. When it comes to high pass filters, I tend to use gentle slopes because I feel that it sounds a bit more natural. I rarely go above 24 dB per octave.
We don't need a playground. Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down. We're warriors, we don't need a playground. Out on a quest, how we play around. Swing around. Coming down. We're warriors, we don't need a playground. Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone.
The part of the vocals that probably needs the most attention is the mid-range. The mid-range is really important when it comes to vocals. You can have resonant frequencies, you can have that nasal sound there, a lot of things that can break your mix. That's an area where you should focus cleaning things up. I usually use bell filters with narrow Qs. That way I can be really surgical. You can hear in this vocal that I have some plosives. The artist was really close to the microphone.
Out on a quest, how we play
around. That has some plosives. That can be dealt with Corrective EQ just by adding a low shelf. You can make it even dynamic.
Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down. We're out on a quest, how we play around.
So now it's a bit more under control. Let's make it dynamic, so we are affecting just that plosive sound.
Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down. We're warriors, we don't need a playground. Out on a quest.
So this is something really basic that I would do when it comes to corrective EQ on vocals. The question is where you should add this corrective EQ. For me, I tend to use corrective EQ right in the beginning of the chain and also in the middle of the chain or more towards the end of the chain. So usually I have two different corrective EQs. And let me explain why. Usually in the vocal chain you have a compressor. The frequency balance on the vocal will affect that compressor. This is how the vocals sound compressed, but without the corrective EQ.
Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until out on a quest, how we play around.
And this is how the vocals sound with the Corrective EQ.
Out on a quest, how we play around. Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword. Out on a quest, how we play around.
So the frequency balance that you have in the vocals will affect the compressor. The compressor will react to more frequencies when you don't have that corrective EQ done before it. This is a really nice way to ensure that you don't bring up nasty frequencies with the compressor. So you correct the frequencies in the vocals that are nasty, and that way the compressor will not bring those frequencies that much up front. So you have a cleaner vocal sound. This is why I usually tend to use Corrective EQ before the compressor. Another way that you can do it, but with slightly different results, you can use Corrective EQ after compression, and that's what I do a lot of the times with compressors, especially with character compressors, where you add a lot of tonal information, some saturation, some distortion. The reaction of the compressor adds something really aggressive to the vocal. You can control some of that by adding a Corrective EQ after compressing. If we move the Corrective EQ after,
out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down. Out on a quest, how we play around. Out on a quest, how we play around. Out on a quest, how we play around.
We have slightly different results when we use the EQ before and after compression. If you really understand Corrective EQ, you will never have muddy, boxy vocals. It's really important to know how to use Corrective EQ and where to use it. Try and use a Corrective EQ right in the beginning of the chain and be subtle with it. Be subtle with it because you can always add another Corrective EQ down the line. You can add a Corrective EQ after compression where you have those nasty frequency lifted. Now let's talk about the tonal EQ. One example of tonal EQ is a tilt EQ. Let's add a tilt shelf. You can see that with a tilt EQ we just shift the balance between high frequencies and low frequencies. A tilt filter is something that I use sometimes when it comes to this sort of vocals where you have a lot of boominess.
Around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down. We're warriors, we don't need a playground. Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down.
So we're adding top end and we also remove some of that low end. This is where you can bring some nice particularities about the vocals up front. This can be used in two different ways, and you have to experiment with the position of the tonal EQ. You can use it before compression and you can use it after. In both cases, the sound will be different because it will impact the way the compressor reacts. Let's make it a bit more extreme, like 10 dB. If we have the tonal EQ before the compressor,
out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing.
And this is how it sounds if we have the tonal EQ after the compressor.
Out on a quest, how we play around. My sword is a stick that I swing around. Gone until the sun is coming down.
So we have a really obvious difference between the two sounds with basically the same settings on both. The difference is how we hit the compressor. When we have the tonal EQ before the compressor, that big top end boost will push the compressor, so that top end will be more under control. This is something that I do sometimes just to make sure that I can get bright vocals but under control. So you push top end into a compressor, but I also use tonal EQs after compression to add a nice subtle sparkle without having that sparkle affected by a compressor. Now let me show you my usual chain. First in the chain, a corrective EQ, then compression, a tonal EQ. This is the basic chain. With this you can achieve a clean sound without any issues. A lot of the time things change a bit. For example, I have a corrective EQ, a tonal EQ, compression, corrective EQ, and a tonal EQ at the end of the chain. That mid section of the vocal chain can have saturation, de-essing, multiple compressors. So this is just a placeholder. This is probably the way I mix the most. Corrective, tonal, compression, and the rest of the chain, corrective again, and tonal. The last tonal EQ can be replaced with other tonal changing plugins like saturation, plugins like Fresh Air from Slate, that's free, exciters. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, hit the like button, don't forget to follow me on Instagram. Thanks for the support and see you guys really soon. Cheers.